In the hush before sunrise, when the earth still dreams, when rivers whisper silver and the mountains glow with frost, a child of no herald, born nameless to the crowd, awoke with a question coiled bright in the marrow. Is life the chain of footprints left by others, or the wingbeat of a path no one can chart? All around her the village hummed with schedules, bells and ledgers, elders' nods and neighbors' frowns. They measured worth in mirrors of tradition, in maps whose ink was dry before her birth. She learned their catechisms of must and should, and felt them like a winter cloak of stone. Yet in her sleep a hawk kept circling higher, its cry a spark that burned behind her ribs. It told of valleys none had dared to enter, of peaks unmarked by carved memorial names. She woke with the taste of distance on her tongue, a hunger older than the stories told at dusk. She tried to walk the corridors of duty, tried to wear the mask of satisfied belonging. But her shadow grew restless, breaking ranks. It stretched toward doorways nobody unlocked. Each time she bent to fit the frame of custom, some filament within her snapped and sang. "Why do you rebel?" the elders asked. "Because my blood remembers rivers you've forgotten." "Why do you dream?" the merchants mocked. "Because your gold can't pay for breath of dawn." "Why do you stray?" the lovers sighed. "Because your fences make my sky too small." So one dusk, when the smoke of hearths rose vertical, and the first star stood witness like a silver nail, she left the gate without farewell or blessing, only the hawk cry echoing in her chest. No path ahead, only wild grass in the dark. But her feet moved like prophecy, unafraid. The village faded behind her, a woven cage unspooling, and in its place the world widened like a lung. She felt the weight of expectation peel away, like skins of an old fruit, bitter but clinging. Underneath, raw nerve, but also light. Her pulse became a drum the stars could hear. Thus began her wandering, not as exile, but as pilgrim of an unnamed temple, the shrine of self-chosen steps, the gospel of the road no map can bind. And every breath she drew beyond their borders was an answer to the question in her bones. Dawn spilled copper over her shoulders as the land unfolded, a quilt of unclaimed color. The hawk flew ahead, a flicker against eternity, drawing her toward the first test, a valley split by two roads, each marked by stone pillars engraved with voices. On the left, the pillar read certainty. On the right, freedom. The left road smooth as glass, lined with torches, its air full of the scent of bread and applause. The right road a tangle of roots and shadow, its only promise the unknown. A figure rose from the left road, a king clad in parchments, crown of stamped approvals, his eyes a bureaucrat's ledger, his mouth a chorus of polite rules. "Child," he said, "come to the road of order. Here your life will be measured and rewarded. You'll never hunger, never doubt. Only walk where we have walked, sign where we have signed, and you shall be beloved by the expected world." She felt the pull, the easy warmth, the way his voice braided safety with flattery. But the hawk above screamed once, and she remembered the hunger that had no name. "Your offer is kindness, but its cage too small," she whispered. "I choose the road where no king waits." And stepping from his shadow, she took the tangle of roots. Behind her, the king's crown cracked like dry parchment in a firestorm. The second trial waited by a river whose surface glittered with illusions of rest. A siren of comfort rose from the water, hair of silk, eyes of holiday, voice like a lullaby of couches and screens. "Lay down your pack," she crooned. "Your wanderings are wounds you choose. Stay with me in the garden of endless ease. No expectation, no struggle, only soft forgetting." For a heartbeat, the traveler ached for the surrender of soft moss, the hush of someone else deciding. But then she saw, under the siren's smile, the dull glaze of those who had stayed. Souls turned pale as unlit wax. "Rest is a season," Not a life, she said. I'll sleep when my path grows flowers of its own. She turned, and the river turned to glass, shattering as she stepped beyond. The third trial came as night fell. A judge of shame awaited by a withered tree, robes sewn from gossip, gavel carved of family size. Who are you to defy our stories? Thundered the judge. Every step you take writes ungrateful on your skin. Your mother's hopes, your father's sweat, all squandered for a fantasy of self. Return before the village curses your name. She trembled. Love and guilt tangled like brambles in her chest. But then she remembered how love without freedom turns to pity, and pity to control. She raised her chin. I honor what birthed me by being whole, she said. And if my wholeness looks like defiance, may time translate my footsteps into blessing. The judge dissolved into wind. The withered tree burst into sudden bloom. And she walked on, each step a vow to herself. I will not be a shadow of someone else's wish. I will be the dawn they forgot was possible. The path climbed toward a plateau where the stars felt closer, like holes punched in a tent of velvet. Her muscles burned, but in that fire, something steady formed. Not pride, but presence. Here she met others, not many, but enough to shift the silence. A painter sitting on a cliff, turning dust into color. A hermit carving words into stone, not for readers, but for the echo they made. A dancer who spun with no audience but the wind. Each had walked away from maps of expectation, yet each bore different scars. The painter's hands trembled from hunger. The hermit's eyes flickered with loneliness. The dancer's feet bled from stones. They welcomed her without question. Around a small fire they shared bread made of improvisation, water caught from clouds. The painter spoke. Freedom is not an escape, but a creation. Without discipline, it rots into chaos. The hermit added, silence teaches you whether your path is real or just rebellion's echo. The dancer laughed, and joy. Don't forget joy. Otherwise your path becomes another prison. She listened, heart a clay bowl catching their words like rain. And she saw how each of them still carried pieces of the world they'd left. Some heavy, some luminous. She stayed a season learning. She painted with the painter, sat in silence with the hermit, danced barefoot until her feet learned to bleed and heal at once. But when spring winds rose, the hawk circled again, calling her onward. Her companions clasped her hands. The road ahead is yours alone, the painter said, but know that solitude doesn't erase connection. We'll be the constellations behind you. She bowed, not in submission, but in gratitude, and stepped back into the open, carrying their fragments of wisdom like flintstones in her pocket, ready to strike sparks when nights grew long. Mountains rose now like questions too large for language, snowfields of untried silence, cliffs of decision. She climbed, each breath a confession, each muscle a sermon. Storms tested her resolve, not with enemies, but emptiness. White winds erasing even the hawk's cry. Doubt whispered, wasn't the king's road easier? Wasn't the siren's garden softer? Isn't freedom just another name for exile? She almost turned back, but then she felt, in her chest, not the hawk, but her own pulse, a rhythm no storm could smother. She climbed. At the summit stood a mirror taller than any tree, forged of every expectation she'd ever known. Teachers, lovers, parents, strangers, all their faces flickering in its surface like trapped fish. It spoke without sound. Look, you are the sum of what they see. Without us, you are nothing. She looked and saw indeed versions of herself in wedding clothes she never wanted, behind desks she never chose, smiling masks of approval, frowning masks of disgrace. Tears blurred her vision. If I break you, will I vanish? She asked. The mirror trembled. She lifted one of the flint stones given by her companions, struck it against her doubt. Sparks flew, not of destruction, but of recognition. I am not against you, she whispered, but I am not only you. And with her bare hand she pressed the mirror. It cracked like ice under spring thaw, splintering into 1,000 horizons. Through the shards, she saw not nothingness, but space. Valleys of unimagined color, rivers whose names she could invent, skies wide enough for every self she might become. The mirror dissolved into light and drifted into her veins. She felt heavy chains turning to threads of possibility. She was no longer walking away from the world, but walking into her own dimension of it. The hawk landed on her shoulder at last, not as guide, but as equal. Together they looked out over the expanse. This, she murmured, is what life can be. Not defiance for its own sake, but the courage to author one's steps. Seasons later she returned, not to apologize, not to conquer, but to be present. The village had changed. Children now curious about the horizon, elders still cautious but softer at the edges. She walked through the gate she once left, carrying no trophies, only stories. Some turned away, still muttering about rebellion and wasted youth. But others felt a stirring, a memory of their own unwalked paths. She did not preach. She built a small garden on the outskirts, open to whoever wished to plant a seed. She played music at dusk, melodies learned from rivers and storms. Little by little, the garden filled, with plants no one had seen before, with laughter that didn't ask permission. She became a living example that walking one's own path need not mean burning bridges. Some villagers began their own small journeys. Not dramatic, not heroic, but genuine. A merchant painting after work, a grandmother learning to read the stars, a child daring to ask why without fear. She smiled, knowing she had not escaped expectations to be alone, but to show another way of belonging, one woven of choice rather than coercion. At night she sat outside her hut, the hawk asleep nearby, watching constellations she had named herself. And in the quiet she felt the world no longer as a fence, but as a field of possible dances. Life, she realized, is not a single road or rebellion, but the ongoing art of listening inward and stepping outward with integrity. She closed her eyes, breathed deep. Somewhere far off, another child was waking with the same question, and the wind carried her answer like pollen into tomorrow. More than living to others' expectancies, life is the courage to shape a path that sings your own unborrowed name. The end. Thank you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to support epic content like this.